coming and welcome to the Art Talk on Rust Show. For our folks out on Instagram, this is the Brooklyn Waterfront Artists Coalition. The show started a couple months ago. It's going to run into, I believe, December. We're still working it out right now. It's
November 20th. Just one more week.
November 20th.
November 20th for sure. Okay, I thought we might be doing something with winter. Okay, so there's still time to come out and check it out live. We did it like this so you can kind of see a little bit while we talk. So we're just going to jump into it. We have artist Bonnie Ralston and Joe Banish. And behind us, this is their work. And it's a show that that they thought would look good together, and it really works well. If we can just jump into a little bit of who you are and what you do. Start with you, Bonnie.
Bonnie Ralston. I am primarily a sculptor, but I'm also worked with the exception of the two pieces that are hanging here. Our works on paper, which is a whole process that actually was born out of the pandemic and born out of necessity. I'll talk about that a little bit later.
Sure.
I'm Joe Banish. I'm primarily a painter, and what you're seeing of my work here are photographs. But as a painter, I take pictures of paintings. That's the way I treat these photographs, and I think you'll see as we talk that to me they're paintings.
Okay, so I want to get into a little bit of the your technique. So as a photographer, I like to take photographs of Rust too. I look for specific things. What leads you when you're looking at something? What makes you say, you know what, that's a great shot? Well, specifically with Rust styles.
Well, as a painter in general, and this is one of the differences. There are so many similarities, as you can see in the show here, between Bonnie and I. But one of the differences is that when I'm out shooting photographs, I'm not looking for rust.
Okay.
If rust finds me, that's really great, and that's why you'll see pieces of my work here that date back as far as 2006, and as late as last summer. So I've been able to curate basically rust-based things that work very well with what Bonnie is creating by doing that. What I'm looking for, and what I do as an artist in general, is I'm looking for compelling geometry. And to me, compelling geometry goes back to post-impressionist painter Paul Cézanne. He said, everything in nature can be reduced to a sphere, a cylinder, or a what's the third one?
Square.
No, it's a, what do they call it? Pyramid. Basically a cylindrical triangle. I take it one step further and flatten those to the geometric square, rectangle, and circle. You'll see that in my paintings, you'll see it in my photography over and over and over again, is squares, rectangles, and triangles, or variations thereof. Rectangles, squares, circles, ovals, and various forms of triangles.
Okay, so the work here, your work, that's part of the show, is actually what you pulled out of your bigger vision. It wasn't like you don't go out looking specifically for us.
Right. If I'm going out and I find something that attracts me, I'm not necessarily, even at the time, even thinking, oh, this can be in my Rust collection. I have in my own head, and I suppose many people do, when you start doing, I've been doing this for 45 years. So you start to see groups and patterns in your work. Oh, well, this maybe will belong to this kind of a series, and maybe this belongs to this kind of a series. So that's one thing. I'll give you an example here with this piece, and this piece here. These are all taken the same time, the same place. They were a dumpster in Prospect Park. As an artist, I immediately look at, I'm drawn to the linear element, because the linear element is also the fourth thing that I'm looking for in my work. And those of you who know my paintings, I'm layering things in my paintings. I'm doing underpainting and I'm scratching into the paint on top to reveal the layer that's below. And that's what I'm looking for in photographs as well. I'm looking for layers. Why and why rust is because it adds that fourth dimension, and that fourth dimension is time. So now you're looking back into the past when you scratch into a layer. When you're seeing something that has happened, like an action painting, you're looking back in time. You're seeing something that happened and you're documenting that. And here you see triangle, linear, rectangles, semicircles. You're seeing the same thing in all the work.
Yeah. This piece here is actually one of my favorites because I shoot a lot of landscape, and this looks landscape. This looks almost like a sky. And this actually looks like a scene from outside. So, you know, this is the water, the rocks, this could be, I don't know, like a sail. So I see what you're talking about, because you're looking for the geometry, and you capture it, you put it together, and it just happens to be rust.
In the early days of my abstraction, it would bother me that people wanted to find things in them. But in my older, wiser days, I realized that this is something that people have always done.
Yeah.
When they're looking at clouds, it can't be just clouds. It has to look like Elvis or Virgin Mary on your toast.
Yeah, yeah.
So people, I think, are predisposed to that, and I'm fine with that. You know, I thought you were going to talk about the sailboat that's in there. Does that describe it?
Yes, it does. It does. Thank you. So, Bonnie, talk a little bit about your technique.
Ooh. So technique. Like I was mentioning that it was born out of necessity because of the pandemic. So as I mentioned, I'm primarily a sculptor, and I work with clay, and I was working out of a community studio in Gowanus that was shuttered because of the pandemic. But at the time with my sculpture, I'd been moving from smaller works to larger pieces that incorporate a lot of found materials. I'm a scavenger. It's in my blood. It's, growing up, I was always out with my grandparents going on walks, and we would have a plastic bag in our pockets, and we'd be collecting tennis balls that we found on the street, or cans that we were going to return those for, 5 cents. So I've always been attuned to just kind of picking stuff up and keeping it. So I had been collecting up until 2020. I still am. These are, you're never going to look at a sidewalk the same way. These are bristles from mechanical brooms, also known as the sidewalk sweepers from Department of Sanitation. They kick these bristles out everywhere. So you find them on the gutter, you'll find them on the sidewalk, some in better condition. I actually have at one point I had categorize them in terms of their height from 3 inches all the way to 12. So all that said, I had been collecting these for a specific large-scale sculpture that I actually had on view here. I think sometime last year. It's of a giant amphipod crustacean, and I had used these as the bristles. So here it is, spring of 2020. I need to be creative. I need an outlet. Clay is no longer an option for me, but I had all of this metal. So I thought, well, why don't I start experimenting using that as a medium? My eyes are on the sidewalks. I'm sure you always see it after a rainstorm, or even right now when you see the leaves from the oak trees on the sidewalk, and the tannins are actually staining, right? They're staining the sidewalk, and so you see this trace of something that was on the ground that's no longer there. Same thing with these. You see when people put trash cans out on the street, and then they take it back in, and there's that beautiful circle of rust that's on the sidewalk. This idea that something or someone was here before. So it was very humble. I started with a little bit of lemon juice. It was very stinky. I do not recommend using lemon juice and steel. It really smells. But I was successful in printing using the rust, using the steel, actually oxidizing it onto the paper. where it becomes part, yeah, sure, yeah, like, part of the paper. So this is an early test. And it's like salt water, so I started looking at salt water. Then I tried different vinegars. So again, I'm at home, we're in lockdown, so I have at my disposal vinegar, I have some water, of course, I have hydrogen peroxide, I even tried contact lens solution, and just started to see what kind of variations of color I could get just from something as humble as a steel bristle. So that began the whole exploration, and once I was able to get some success here, I started experimenting more with the salt water. And what was an interesting, happy accident is, I can put this down now, thanks, Joe. I had adjusted the ratio of salt to water, and I had super saturated the solution with the salt. I also use some Epsom salts too. I would recommend not doing that with art because it is so reactive to the atmosphere and especially the water content in our air. That I had one piece that was leaning up in our apartment. It was a salt and Epsom salt piece. It was hot, like it was August, so it was probably like 90 degrees or something in our apartment. And the next morning I woke up and there was this trail of water on the floor, and it was coming directly from the piece because overnight the Epsom salt and the salt had absorbed that water and then released it back. And so it was like a living organism. Like, holy crap, what am I going to do with this? So this whole idea is ruined, or maybe I should go with it. So I started to push that idea then. So some of these pieces here, like behind Garfield, you can see if there's a little bit of a sparkle or a texture. That's where I use table salt, not the Epsom salts. But really increase the ratio of the salt so that as the pieces dry and the water evaporates, the salt crystals recrystallize onto the paper. And so that became another medium that I started working with in addition to the rest, and it was a salt. Then I started using some copper. All of these things are just, here's the bristles, here's another favorite component of mine is the construction wire ties. Thanks, Joe. And it's funny, where do I get these from? I picked them up off the street, but Joe has given me some rust. My fellow artist Tracy Penn gave me a piece of rust. I just got some rust from the Gowanus Dredgers, from a piece. So I'm now like the rust lady, apparently. Actually, my boss introduced me to a new person in her office and described me as Bonnie collects rusty metal. So,
Why do you start with the rusty?
Why rust?
No, the rusty pieces as opposed to just regular metal.
Well, the one thing is I know it's steel, so I know it's going to rust.
Right.
I know it's going to continue. But there's just something, you were talking about it, Joe, about this idea.
Well, you had mentioned to me that the process is just a lot sooner, it happens a lot sooner when there's rust already present.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I was actually going to bring for a point of comparison, and I can hand you that after. You can look at them, just wash your hands. But a comparison between an untouched bristle and then one that I've used for a bit. I think what I really like about the process is that if I use these enough, they're going to disappear. And I think there's this whole idea, you were talking about time, this idea of capturing time and arresting time. What I think is so poignant about it is you go back to that dumpster and that is gone. That's a moment in time that you saw, you captured, and now and I feel like in my work it's similar. I'm also capturing and arresting time, but it's these are follies, right? Like time continues, and we just march towards the future. Sorry, going off a little bit here.
No, but that kind of leads into a question I had about these pieces. So are these pieces is oxidation still happening? Will it change over time?
So the oxidation has happened, right?
Okay.
There is no more physical metal in the piece, but what will continue to evolve is the salt.
Okay.
In this one specifically, you can see there's sort of a halo of white on the left side, and that was not there when I initially made the piece, so it's always a little bit of a surprise when I go into the archives and I look at the box and I open the box, I'm like, oh wow, this really And I think that's, you know, I think that's beautiful. I mean, it's kind of ironic, like this is archival framing and archival materials, but the artwork itself is not, and that's part of the process. So it's.
Would the frame then have constrained that process? If it had more space, would it grow more over time, or is that?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. It's fixed. I mean, once I remove the piece of metal, the color won't really shift, but it will be, the salt will still continue to interact with the atmosphere.
And if anyone hasn't taken a look at the work moving, as you walk, you'll see the grains of salt picking up the light. That's the first thing that I saw in her work before she even explained, you know, what it was. So, I mean, I wish we could do something so the folks on Instagram can see it, but as you move, you see it's glistening. Just a little specks, little facets of grains of salt just picking up the light. It's really cool.
It's an extension very much of a Roscoe type paint.
Oh.
Yeah.
I didn't think of that, but that's an
Well,
honor.
That's a lead into imagery.
Well, but it is. I mean, when you think of a Roscoe painting and you look at it, it has a movement that's occurring. You know, it's more of a vibration type thing, but it still has it's moving as you look at it. And if you're walking and looking at it, I mean, it's moving, and yeah. I mean, it took me a long time to realize why he was a great artist. Before I didn't see the movement initially, but now every time I think of it, I see it. And now that he's mentioned it, I will come and I'll see it. Yeah. And you know, it must be really easy to give you presents for your birthday and other holidays because all you want is rusty things. And
Yeah,
it's really easy. I mean,
yeah, it's really easy to make me happy. Just give me a
Yes,
piece of rusty
it's
junk
amazing.
and I'm good.
You bring a lot to the table.
Yeah. Well, I think, and that's kind of the point of this too, is that, you know, we're just surrounded by so much beauty that we didn't walk by because we put a value. This is a piece of junk that's on the street, so it has no value to me. There's no potential in it, and I think this is something that's similar to both Joe's photography and these pieces, is that it's really trying to like reframe how we go through the world and how we kind of take things for granted, but you know, the possibilities are limitless and endless. It's just, you just need to like switch the way you look at something.
Yeah.
And take the value judgment away and question assumptions. Question authority, right?
Yeah.
But that's kind of where that.
It's funny, I think I do that, and I don't think I've ever seen a bristle.
Oh, you're
And
gonna see that.
I'll be looking for them now.
You're gonna have bristle eyes, like you're just, and then I'll actually go, and it's become kind of a,
Where are those bristles on the sidewalk?
everywhere.
I've
It's
never
now,
seen
it's
it.
gonna be your.
I mean, I have fallen many times on the sidewalk and have never seen that, never popped out.
You know, I think to her point, I think we just dismissed it, but we've seen it, but it's like, you know,
But
it's.
like, I'm telling you, I've fallen a lot on the sidewalk and never popped up. I'm telling you, I've fallen forward and backward in every direction and it never popped up. I mean, now I'm gonna have to take a whole new approach to falling.
So, why did you haven't worked together before, and you don't focus just on Russ. What made you collaborate?
Bonnie and I are both members here at BWAC. And I guess about 3 years ago, we were down the center aisle near the back there. We were showing in panels next to each other. And so one of the great things about being a member at BWAC is that interaction with other artists. So we were able to talk and talk about our own sensibilities. But of course, immediately I was drawn to the geometry that's happening in Bonnie's pieces. She happened to be showing several pieces that were based on circles, and I came off a decade of doing nothing but circles from about 2007 to 2017, and which is just after that, I think, is when we first met. So we casually said, you know, yeah, we should talk about doing something. And then, you know, as we headed into the pandemic, we were getting a little more serious about, we really got to talk about putting something together. And then we started saying, let's set a goal, let's put it together. We started exchanging some imagery and realizing we had a tremendous amount of overlap in our work. There was somebody at our opening here who was a little confused. They thought these were by the same person. And I thought that was an incredible compliment, because we were able to, we literally curated each other's work through email. So we were able to plot out every aspect of this. Do you want to talk about the actual layout of the show?
You can get
Or
into
do you want to
that,
add
because I
anything
think
to how we got the show together?
I mean, I think it was just simpatico. I think that's just a similar approach, aesthetic. We're both very conceptual and have a good senses of humor.
And it flows.
And
I
it
mean,
flows,
it
yeah.
flows as if it is one artist.
And that was, in terms of how, as Joe was mentioning, how we planned it, it was all through the magic of the internet and Google Drive and sharing pictures, and then we each, we used InDesign and kind of did a layout of everything and had like little thumbnails, everything to scale. It was a lot of planning work in advance, but it made it possible for us to hang a show like this in 2 weekends.
Yeah, but I want to talk about the concept.
Oh, sure.
I'll date myself a little bit here. I don't know how many of you remember the band Deep Purple. Well, if you really go deep into Deep Purple's catalog, they did an album with the London Symphony Orchestra where they wrote a symphony in 3 parts. The first part was the rock band, the second part was the orchestra, and the third part was the combining of the rock band and orchestra. Not an incredibly successful experiment, but I like the idea. And that's the way I feel what we've done here. And that's the way we approach the setup in this space. You'll see immediately after our introduction that my wall here of circles is offset by Bonnie's wall of circles. My frames are black, Bonnie's frames are white. This is all intentional. We wanted this kind of a setup. They speak to each other. They're speaking in almost different languages, but yet they're speaking in similar terms. One of the reasons I'm really drawn to circles, and in general squares and triangles, is when you go back through modern human history, basically, when you start looking at the kind of marks that people made, some of the original marks that people made included simple geometric shapes. And that's what I strive for and what I look for, and that's what I see when I look at Bonnie's work, before you get into the wonderful layers of salt and living organism that's happening. And the actual print, like you say, that she's making a print of something. So we've set up on opposite walls. Then we came together on this big wall, and if you look at it, I mean, we originally had this set up on our emails as a typical museum or gallery setup with 2 rows of artwork. And we decided we wanted it much more organic. We wanted this wall to be like rust. And if you'll look at it, it starts out and expands and contracts and moves as you go down the wall. And that is entirely intentional. Then through the great insight of Bonnie Ralston, you'll see little vignettes happening. So as you're walking through, you're going to see a grouping that's going to relate to itself. And you'll notice these very subtly because we've changed the space between them. And that's what happens in this wall down here. Then you're talking about a couple of extra panels, which in some ways is our closing statements. Bonnie has one, and I have one. Bonnie is reinforcing her technique, and again, the circles, I'm reinforcing again, when you look at them, circles, triangles, and rectangles and squares. And that's the way the show is laid out.
And I just want to say, if anyone's looking on Instagram, we'll have pictures on the site so you can see the walls that he's talking about right now.
And if people on Instagram go to bwac.org and go to the Rush Show, there is a link to a 3D virtual walkthrough of this show.
Yeah, pretty cool. So I just wanted to end it by talking about Russ. Why Russ?
You know, if you ask me that on a different day, I'm gonna give you a different answer. So today, I mean, it again, it's one of those, it's destruction, right? It's evidence of a transformation that's happening. And, I mean, we're all works in progress, and that idea of temporality, but also capturing a moment in time. I think Russ does it so beautifully. It's a natural process. It's nothing to be afraid of. It's beautiful to me. Also because as the metal is obliterated, it's like leaving space for something new to come through. So it's that idea of birth and cycles and regeneration and leading towards something new. So that's where, that's my answer for today on why Russ.
And I'll go to this piece here, and this is the piece I chose for my half of the card, because several things happen in there that speak to me as an artist when I first saw this in a doorway. One is the red circle, and immediately the red color draws your attention. But I see it as a circle, and I suppose most of you do. It's actually not a circle, but the psychology of perception wants to complete that circle, even though it's not present, and it wasn't present in the doorway. But I enjoy that. I enjoy that psychological connection with perception. The diamond plating over here has remnants of ovals and triangles combined. And then rust comes in. It's an organic thing, it's a living thing. And this is called Mind If I Cut In. And so you're talking about man-made geometry with Mother Nature literally coming between them. So that's why rust, in my case, when I find rust, it's going to speak to me in those kind of terms of time, layering, and the juxtaposition to geometry. And I think we have some time for questions.
Great, yeah, we do. Do we have any questions? Michael?
In this period of working together, going forward, do you see things that will influence you from the other person, the other artist in the future?
Good question.
Absolutely, absolutely. I will never look at salt the same again.
Or the sidewalk.
And I have seen these, and I did not know what they were. So now I know.
No, I mean, in your work, do you see anything
Yeah.
you're going to take from Bonnie's work?
Yeah, I have to figure out a way to incorporate more texture in my work, I think.
And for me, I think it's color. The way that Joe is able to bring out so many different subtle colors in the photography. Well, although rust is principal, just the palette of colors that he has there, you can see I'm pretty consistent brown.
And green.
And green, and a little bit of copper there. So looking at how I can bring color into it in a way that's authentic to the process that I use.
Yeah.
I suppose you know in advance which solvent you're going to use, you're going to apply to get a certain effect.
So that's a really great question. Like I started out, so my background is in graphic design. So of course iterating and a million different versions of one thing till you get to the end. So that kind of testing is kind of foremost in my mind. So this, for example, was showing that this one's actually faded. I wish I had a photo of it in the beginning, but I would test different fluids and just see how they were.
So for example, which one of those semicircles would be vinegar, which would be?
Yeah, so this is salt and povidone iodine, povidone and white vinegar, red wine vinegar, rice wine vinegar, apple cider. But I think part of it, it's similar to ceramics too, in terms of how I treat the surface of the clay, because I'll just use oxide again, you know, red iron oxide right here, it's the same material. They're really limited with the palette and really push the materials and see what they can do. I'm not a chemist, and I've done some research on the whole oxidation process and just for my own understanding, but I don't want to know too much about it because I think that takes some of the discovery and the fun, because the way that I look at them, they're not, I mean, they're works of art, but they're really just highlighting a process. Like, I'm not making them, I'm putting the things into clay, water, salt, paper, time, and then letting, the work.
To what degree does spontaneity enter into the creation? Is there a lot of spontaneity, or how controlled is it?
That's a great question. It's a good balance. I mean, spontaneity is what's going to happen with the materials, and a lot of it is just intuitive. Once I have everything set up, I'll just, I think I'm just going to add a little bit of this and see what happens. And I'll often have, 10 or 15 jars full of stuff that I don't even know what's in. It's just like mixtures of some of these different fluids over time.
You stole my
I think what
question.
Bonnie's talking about too is that intersection between science and art. And I think as artists, we don't want to often talk about there's tremendous overlap between what's happening in the arts and what's happening in science. But we're not scientists, we're artists. We look at things in a different way. We're not looking at things empirically unless you're actually doing testing in your Joseph Albers way of repeat, lather, rinse, repeat. But what, in my mind, if you look at the titles as you go around here too, Bonnie is talking about astronomy and chemistry, and I'm talking about physics and geometry. So it's really all one big happy world.
Arlene, I'm wanting to know, both of you, where you tripped upon it, and if you were both really interested in chemistry when you were in your very young years.
I took chemistry because I didn't want to dissect a frog. But other than that, no, I'm much more interested in mathematical equations that I've never been good enough at, actually.
For me, what I love about chemistry was just the formulas, but they're also, I'm terrible with understanding what all the different, it was like that was high school. So honestly, I liked the reactions that we would set up in the chemistry lab, but I kind of wish that if I could go back now, I mean, I'm sure I could, but I don't know if I have the time, but go back and really appreciate that, understanding the process more fully. My high school science love is environmental science, which I do environmental education now professionally, but physics is a big interest of mine, and so a lot of the sculptural pieces that I'm working on, and the one I'm working on next, there's a lot of balance and mass and sort of understanding how things relate in space. The science of.
The sculpture.
Oh, sure. Okay, so what Joe is.
She's talking about right
Two
there.
sculptures.
Yeah. So these are they're on, in some ways they're studies for a larger piece that I had on view earlier this summer. It was made of 148 paper sculptures. So this was kind of like the next evolution of my two-dimensional work to my ceramic work, where I'm using similar processes in terms of forming slabs, but with paper instead. So these are loosely inspired by amphipods or scuds. They're those tiny little crustaceans that we see in our water. And this was, playing with form, but again, it's the same material. It's rust, it's the salt water. The salt, when it dries, gives the paper some rigidity. And I was really, and then I could go on forever about this piece, because I also have, I just made like little sushi mats of the bristles, and I would put the little creatures inside that, wrap it, put it in a bucket, bucket, fill the bucket with, salt water, rust, pour it, sludge too, stone sludge, I'm looking at really using elemental materials, like cast off stuff, garbage, and turning the garbage into something that is, I don't know, it's meaningful, and that, for example, that piece that it's hanging from, pick that off of somebody's trash in my neighborhood, and then the piece that's behind you on that little pedestal, those are some of the wire ties, and that those little pieces are suspended from, and I basically just took the lengths of the wires, and where they ended is where they ended. And then the base that it's on, was something I picked up, over near the Hamilton Freeway, over in, so it's, yeah.
Any other questions? Laura?
Joe, remember we had that conversation about, and you and I were so in sync about how your art with the role of each of the parts and the geometry and all of that. I think your work, both your work is absolutely outstanding. I love it all. And I was just trying to relate, as you were saying, the dumpster thing. I was thinking about what do I do when I want to get that kind of depth? Because you look at it first and you get the question sort of answered up front. And I get the question answered as I go along, and, has to be told, it's time to create depth, so what do I do? And maybe I do something, horizontal or slightly at an angle, but I put, you're scraping, and I'm adding.
That's the artistic process.
Yeah, I mean,
is
but-
what you're talking
yeah,
about.
I
And I
mean-
think both of us have spoken to that in terms of, we may or may not have something to start with, but most artists, what they end up with often changes from what they first started
I
with.
think it would be so much
You start
fun.
with a concept and you build on that.
I would be so much fun to go with you and see what you, spot each of you do, and then I paint and you do the rest.
Wow, maybe we can have an art walk.
That would be really fun. I would like walk
Yeah,
through.
how about a scavenger walk, just
Yeah.
for Ralston?
Yeah.
To Mavis?
But it would be really interesting.
So, I think it's really beautiful, and I know you had spoken about when you were going to do this, I could have envisioned it, and now that I see it, it came out really, really beautiful. And the thing is that I was looking at it a couple of times, I looked at it, I'm like, well, if I get this one, I would have to get this one, because this one goes with this one, but then that one can't be left behind. And it was a mixture of the both of you. I know
Get them all.
Yeah, right? Listen to this Instagram, you're gonna wanna see it and take them with you.
And you wouldn't believe the constant arguing we had on email. Well, actually, it was really quite amazing that we agreed so often.
I think it's the first time I see it, I think it should come back again, I would love to see what else you find out there. I know yours are photographs, Bonnie, yours would change, right? So if I were to buy a piece, or anyone would buy a piece, within time it's gonna look different? I mean, that's exciting, but I just,
Yeah, and
an idea.
it's, so for example, like the piece up here that's sort of like the circle, that one probably won't change that much because there's not a high salt content in the water that was used there. Something like the one behind us here, these three that are in that sort of vertical stack, there's some Epsom salts in there, so they've changed since I made them, and unfortunately, or it's just part of the process.
You can
Little
see it
bits
even
will be
eating-
at the bottom of the frame, but
It's
that's,
eating into the paper as well.
yeah.
Well, it's not unfortunate because then whoever purchases that piece has a unique piece that no
Yeah.
one else would have.
Exactly, and it's creating, it's living on, right, and it's continuing to kind of make itself into, and so it's, again, it's like we're just
It's
putting the
alive.
pieces
would be-
together.
It's alive.
Yeah, it's alive.
This is so long, this has changed since it's been here.
Yeah.
Yeah, so.
If both of you did a chronology, to look at the evolution of your work and see those kinds of changes and how rapidly they came or not.
Is there anyone else in the world who's doing this, or are you the world pioneer?
I'm sure that there are.
Actually, there were two people in the course of the first half of this show that I happened to be here. Unfortunately, Bonnie had COVID for a couple of weeks, but who actually told me that they're working with Russ.
Oh, really?
I was unaware of that, I thought Bonnie was unique in the universe. Evidently, there are a couple of artists who are experimenting with similar ideas.
Do they live in this area, so you could get together?
Would be interesting.
I do know that people, will stain fabric with rust. I know that's a pretty
You could
common.
probably
Fire.
teach a course at this, in the 92nd Street Y. I bet you get quite a crowd.
Protect this
All right.
metal from rusting further now that it's done.
No, just let it do its thing.
Yeah.
20, 30 years, that'll be a crown of rust on it.
I think as long as we don't throw water at it, I think it should be okay. Because actually, what's interesting about rust is it actually is a protective coating over the steel. So once that outer layer has oxidized, what's underneath remains. I don't know if you've ever had like a rusty tool or something, and you throw it in a bucket and scrub it off with, throw it in a bucket of vinegar. It'll come out not too bad.
Yeah, I've always wondered when you see skyscrapers going up and you see rusty metal and you think, they're building it with rusty metal. But yeah, I mean, underneath it's still very strong.
Yeah, I worry about the elevated train and the rusty steel.
Judith, you have a question?
Yeah, actually, I have a friend in California who I go and visit every year, and she makes paper, and so the last time I was out there, we got into making paper, and I forget what the term is when you throw it out of the thing, but we threw it down over metal and left it out to see how it would rust, and so that was a lot of fun. I had to have her look at your little video so she could see.
Have you ever tried rice paper to work on?
Oh, I did some experiments, but it's so fragile, and with the amount of water that I have to apply on the paper,
It would definitely.
yeah, it's torn. So so there's a mix of papers here. Some of it is standard printmaking paper, and some is cotton. This is the cellulose-based one. So this one, and you would probably show more change over time. The ones that are cotton, actually, the ones that are the black paper, that's all cotton-based. So again, I'm trying to think about that balance between, something that has some life to it, but also I still want that disintegration to happen. So it's about experience. Like that's, I think both part work speaks about being in the now, being grateful for what we have in the moment, and understanding that everything is going to change.
Yeah, and acknowledging that something came before.
Yeah.
And that we live in a specific timeline.
Salt is corrosive, right? So salt is going to make things lighter. Is that right? It can make the colors lighter and lighter, and it might even corrode, if that's acrylic, instead of glass. It might even corrode the acrylic, right?
We'll find out. I mean, that's kind of the beauty of it. It's an experiment.
Yeah.
So if we give you a set of experiments to work on, will you do? Come back and tell us how it goes?
Yeah. Give me my homework and we'll do
Yeah.
another show.
Along with the grant money.
Yeah.
All right, so I think we're gonna wrap it up unless anyone else has any questions. I just wanted to say that I love the work and the collaboration that both of you have done here with this. One of the things that I like most is the fact that it's, even though you said you're a resident, it feels like you're on a different spectrum. So with the photograph, we know you get that shot, the photograph captures that moment in time, and that's frozen. But you're creating, so it's we've got static and dynamic, and the way it works together, I think is great. And as you said, it feels like it's a statement on life. So guys, thank you for joining us.